There's a place off the coast of Massachusetts where jagged rocks lie hidden beneath a churning riptide, creating a deadly trap for unsuspecting captains and their ships. This place is known as the Glades. Local Native American tribes were aware of this turbulent undercurrent, and when European explorers like Champlain, Smith, and Standish traveled through this passage, they nearly fell prey to these perilous waters. And during the early 1800s, over 40 ships went down. This history of shipwrecks led locals to demand that a lighthouse be constructed to save lives and to warn off unwary vessels of the dangers that lurked just beneath their hulls. So in 1843, an inspector from the U.S. Lighthouse Service selected an area off the Glades called Minot's Ledge as the place to build a sturdy stone lighthouse. The loss and lives of property here will continue to occur until a light is established. The service went ahead and commissioned Captain William Swift of the Corps of Topographical Engineers. Swift had recently finished a lighthouse held up by iron stilts, a cost-efficient alternative to a stone structure. So he persuaded the service to build a 75-foot-high lighthouse on iron pilings near Minot's Rock, a 25-foot-wide reef a mile off the coast.
There will be a keeper's room and lantern at the very top of the structure. It will offer less resistance to the waves. Waves certainly can't pass through stone.
Construction began in the spring of 1847, with Swift hiring project foreman James Sullivan Savage, the architect of the Bunker Hill Monument in Charlestown, Mass. Savage had 9 holes drilled 5 feet deep in a 25-foot circular diameter. Then he cemented in 45-foot iron pilings with braces to reinforce them. But construction was tedious, as it could only take place on very calm days at low tide. Continuously rotating crews of men worked strenuously in 20-minute shifts. The workers would stay overnight on board a nearby schooner to save time. But when the seas got too rough, they sought shelter in the harbor, which continuously delayed the project. In addition to this, 2 major storms struck the coastline in the summer of 1847. This began to weaken the integrity of the structure. But work never ceased. That is, until January 1st, 1850, when the lighthouse was lit for the very first time. It was a state-of-the-art lighthouse with reflector lamps, an observation room, living quarters, and storage. The lamp shone brightly as it warned off mariners taking passage through the night. It was an engineering marvel and just what the South Shore of Massachusetts needed. On April 5th, Isaac Dunham, the first keeper of the newly erected lighthouse, peered across the ocean and saw a fierce storm brewing on the horizon. Dunham, an experienced lighthouse keeper, had seen his fair share of storms. But when the winds started to howl and the waves began to crash, he knew something was terribly wrong.
God will in mercy still the raging sea. We must perish. It appears to me now that if the wind continues from the east, I cannot survive the night.
But he survived, and now Dunham was very concerned about the stability of the lighthouse. It began to slowly sway in heavy winds, and after a storm in late July, Dunham wrote to the U.S. Lighthouse Service asking for the iron pilings to be strengthened. But his request was ignored, and as a result, Dunham would resign a few months later. In late 1850, the service selected John Bennett as the new lighthouse keeper. He hired Joe Wilson and Joseph Antoine to be his assistants, who were highly confident and boisterous young men. But it didn't take long before Bennett developed the same concerns that his predecessor had. He noted that the pillars had become loosened, and whenever a large wave struck the tower, it would rock, knocking anyone and anything to the ground. He openly told visitors that he would be surprised if the lighthouse would remain standing throughout the winter. Bennett warned the service on numerous occasions about the durability of the structure, insisting that the strained piling braces be removed, straightened, and strengthened. But when officials finally visited the lighthouse to investigate Bennett's claims, it was on a perfectly calm day, which hid the effect that strong storms had. And after examining the structure, they declared that no action needed to be taken. On March 16, 1851, another major storm descended upon the coast. The keepers were forced to retreat from the top lantern level all the way down to the storage room at the bottom of the lighthouse. On April 11th, Bennett was in Boston procuring a new keeper's boat to replace the one that was lost during the storm. Little did he know that another storm, this one of epic proportions, was heading straight at them. The winds began to blow out of the northeast, and the ocean began to get rough, with giant black swells rolling against Minot's ledge. Rain, then hail, and finally snow pummeled the region along with hurricane-force winds. This, coupled with a full moon, amplified an already high tide, creating a dreadful recipe for disaster. While Bennett was stuck in a submerged Boston, Antoine and Wilson were trapped inside the teetering lighthouse. Even though Wilson had once bragged he could swim to shore if the lighthouse ever toppled, he now realized their lives were in serious danger. Over the next few days, the storm pounded the Massachusetts seaboard, and on April 16th, when Bennett had finally arrived back at the Glades, the storm began to intensify. When he peered out through the driving sleet, he saw the lighthouse still standing, but feared for his men. Meanwhile, at Minot's ledge, the howling winds rocked the lighthouse back and forth as Antoine and Wilson held on for dear life with no way out. But at 5 p.m., the men managed to climb the ladder and light the lamp, carrying out their responsibility to protect vessels foundering in the turbulent ocean. But by 10 p.m., the light went out. And 3 hours later, residents could hear the lighthouse bell ringing wildly. Bennett, along with others, gathered on the beach, but they could not see the lighthouse through the relentless snow. The residents implored Bennett,
Go and help those poor souls. Save the lightkeepers.
"There's nothing I can do." A monstrous wave smashed the lighthouse. A thunderous groan echoed across the Glades. The light was out. The ringing had stopped. The lighthouse and the young men were swallowed by the ocean. The storm finally passed, and at the first break of dawn, Bennett hurried down to the beach and peered out across the bay. And what he saw was truly heartbreaking. All that was gone. A few weeks later, a bottle washed ashore. Inside, it contained a message from the missing men who went down with the lighthouse. The letter read, "The lighthouse won't stand over tonight. She shakes 3 feet each way now. God bless you all. J.W. and J.A." Minot's light was eventually rebuilt, this time out of stone, and was relit in 1860. The lighthouse still stands and continues to guide ships through the treacherous waters off the coast of the Glades. Today, some residents say they can still hear the sound of a phantom bell ringing, as it did that tragic night in 1851, when New England's famous lighthouse storm struck.